Yeah.
By Vice Speaker, you're on, sir.
Okay. This roundtable, conducted by the Committee on Appropriations and Education, will come to order. Notice of this hearing was disseminated to all local media outlets via electronic format, and with second notices provided, on the 13th of January, and a second notice was provided on the 19th of January. The one topic that was going to be discussed today was a hybrid bill, Bill number 2. It is the exact same copy that was transmitted to the Committee on Appropriations in June of 2014 by the retirement fund. I guess it was June 6th, right? We had a special invitation sent out to the governor's office. It took me a while to realize that we were having our discussions last year and we didn't have a representative from AdLoop. And at that point, it became clear that the BBMR director was here as a member of a DC member. And he was not authorized to speak on behalf of the administration. I wrote to the governor, and I'm very grateful that he did send former Senator Cruz to represent the administration. And I think if we get Senator Duenas to read the governor's message into the record, just pull the microphone towards you, please. We can see where that takes us.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Speaker. And this is, of course, the letter on the official letterhead of the governor, Office of the Governor. Have a day, Mr. Vice Speaker and Senators. Thank you for your invitation to participate in a discussion to ensure the government of Guam retirees have the support they need to live comfortably. I understand the hybrid retirement plan proposed by Bill 2 has the full support of the government of Guam Retirement Fund. My fiscal policy team is evaluating the implications and cost of the bill to the government. They also are assessing the cost to the men and women who are looking to the retirement fund to finance their needs, from food to medical services, after dedicating their lives to service of the island of Guam and her people. As we assess the cost of this plan, we also must make certain it is sustainable so that it will be there for retirees for generations to come. In consultation with my fiscal policy team, there are some concerns on the implications of this plan would have on bond ratings and the impact on the unfunded liability of the general fund. As you know, Mr. Vice Speaker, this is an issue that other communities across the nation, including the federal government, are debating in search for solutions. We want to assure the retirement fund and its beneficiaries that this administration is engaged in the local conversation. We will continue to work with the legislature and the retirement fund to find a solution that works for our retirees and our government. And signed sincerely, Eddie Bazakawa, Governor of Guam.
I'm not exactly sure if my interpretation is correct, but part of it, I imagine, is the new GASB Rule 54, or whatever that number is, on exactly how one looks at retirement funds and how that's going to affect the 68. I'm glad they flew you in. And, yeah. I'm just wondering how we go forward at this point with the concerns that are enunciated in this, and if we should wait until we find out what he believes the costs are going to be and whether or not he can afford it, or we as the government can afford it, or would we be? I'm open to suggestions. I just received this 8 minutes ago.
Sure, Mr. Vice Speaker, and we're sorry for that. We appreciate your invitation. I got the email yesterday. You know, in formulating the message to the legislature, and in the meeting that we've at least had, the first meeting on, as you have stated in the media, this first bill, reintroduction, going forward with a clean slate, the idea was that we envision you having at least another roundtable, whereby then we would go with the full fiscal policy team coming forward to engage in, the dialogue as a result of this first blush, this first, movement forward on discussing this bill with all these esteemed colleagues who have joined today. So I don't see a problem going forward. We can take notes, once again on the bill. I know the debate before, as you stated in your opening, this being the same exact bill as introduced, obviously there were many concerns that were addressed by many members of the body. So, perhaps that dialogue will continue with the same bill. So I think we're ready to sit here and take notes. But it was just, that was the key concern, was addressing the fundamental fiscal impact. As well, there was one other thing that was discussed that we were going to propose today. And that was that the retirement fund also reach out to its membership to make sure that there's an educational campaign on one key issue. And that is using the tables. If you use at least one of the tables that was represented in the roundtable and the the committee of the whole in the prior bill discussion, was an implication that there would be 100% increase in the contribution rate of those employees migrating over, and there was a discussion on what tables, whether it meant 100% of all participants, and the options that were given to go from the DC to the hybrid plan. So we just thought it was unfair to basically have this decision be made, and then have said employee, get their paycheck subsequent to the enactment of this legislation, and realize that they now are, which may be the calculation, and are now paying 100% increase in their contribution, while many may be able to afford that, Mr. Vice Speaker and members of this body. That might mean the difference between a mortgage for somebody. That may mean the difference between whether or not their child is going to private school, and adjustments in lifestyle or in obligations that we think is something that should be disclosed prior to just passing this legislation. And so we wanted to also mention that on the record, that we think that should be a simple outreach measure done by the retirement fund as it would be reflected in this legislation.
I don't have the Speaker or the Chairman of Rules concurrence on this, but if the retirement fund put together a FAQ with a whole series of presentations, I would be willing to announce it as a public hearing of the Committee on Appropriations and Adjudication, have it in this room so that we could have the benefit of the TV disseminating it to the community, and then getting support from Committee on Rules to run it a couple of times in the evening, or even schedule it for an evening time, so that we can do the educational campaign. As I sent emails to a couple of you, I've gotten calls from DB members, not DC members. I've gotten calls from DB members who really believe that this is somehow going to undermine their. And I keep trying to repeat what Speaker Joe T. stated, look at your check. Do you see any more money being taken out? I know that as we prepare for the budget, that the difference between 28.5 and the possibility of getting to 33 is making me very queasy and uncomfortable. And so I'm just, I think at some point somebody has to explain that. I mean, I even had a PhD call me the other day and we were on the phone for over an hour discussing questions that had been raised to her by her employees at her department, and her concerns about her own retirement. So it's not an issue of education or even jobs. I mean, there are some misconceptions out there, or maybe perceptions. I can't say they're misconceptions. There are perceptions out there that this is going to do various things, and we're going to need to stop and think about some of those frequently asked questions. How do we address them, with PowerPoint presentations and actual case scenarios that we can show. And I know that I'm hoping that I can ask Senator St. Nicholas at one of those hearings to come forward with his plan, because I believe he has some really interesting ideas about equity for all the GovGuam employees, and talking about changing the formula or the percentage that each one is being assessed, DB, DC, and hybrid, and a couple of other things. And I think if I can ask him to, at some point, prepare presentations on those so that people out there understand it, about why he wants to do those kinds of things, because I think it has a lot of merit. And so if we can have those kinds of presentations over the next next couple of months, I think maybe we might be better off in addressing this. I'm not sure. I apologize. I didn't recognize my colleagues that are with me. Senator James Espaldon on the far right. Senator Narissa Underwood. And Senator Mike St. Nicholas. Senator Uggin. Senator Mary Camacho Torres. Was it correct? Senator Tom Atta and Senator Dinesh Rodriguez. And I want to thank the Retirement Board for coming in force, and our representative, our financial actuary for coming in. I apologize. I guess we should have done this in October to find out that there are these kinds of questions. And I think even if the public auditor at some future point might be able to address, I know when you were doing your, what's that barometric or that econometric thing that you, and I remember a presentation a couple of years ago where you talked about 2016 being the year that GASB would be requiring the implementation of Rule 68 on the unfunded life. 24. And so at some point, I think those of us in the legislature who aren't accountants or CPAs, if at some point you could do a presentation on that, just that, because the governor's letter did mention his concern about that, the impact.
I didn't bring the allocation. I didn't even with agencies right now. Tell them what is their pro rata share.
Luke, use the microphone, please.
All right, and in fact, we've asked them to do a few more calculations, one for the legislature, one for the judiciary, as well. For example, there are some whose their net position will go into a negative, but it's something, the finance community at large is already prepared to know that it's going to come out. So it's not a surprise in the financial world, because that has been coming for a long time. But for some agencies, the implication of it is it's a little bit more. And that allocation was prepared by Milliman, and we've just had further refinements so that we could for the legislature, so on their books they would know what is their share of the unfunded liability. Likewise for the judiciary, even for OPA, for the Attorney General, as well.
And I think one of the concerns, at least, that was stated in the governor, was the impact on bond rating. And so I guess that's a hint that there's going to be
the
some
impact
bond
is
borrowing.
that from there's only about one or two states, I think it's Wisconsin and maybe, that have surpluses. The vast majority of states have unfunded liabilities. There's only one or two states, and I think probably the poster childs who are pretty bad would be Illinois, New Jersey, Connecticut. So GovGuam is not quite up in there, but it's pretty big. We're talking about allocating $1.4 billion to all of the agencies, which it will be reflected on their financial statements. And of course, the big hit will be the general fund and DOE against their financials.
Okay.
For the record, there's no intent to borrow. The idea, thank you, Mr. Vice Speaker, I heard that. The idea being that, I think it'd be prudent for bond counsel to run proposals such as this on existing. As you know, there's a proposal to at least refinance for savings, and Gita will be presenting that. But the thing is that going forward, when you look at all of our obligations and our current pledges, there may be bonds, that would be affected. Of course, when we got pledged against the BBT, we should be okay there because that's the guarantee. But in the event that what is, when the unfunded liability gets assumed as debt, then stability and the other issues come forward. And so that's the whole thing. I mean, at least vet that to ensure that there is no current implication. And then, of course, going forward, it would be incumbent upon, at least for us to try to see if the legislation can be strengthened to ensure. We always know that no legislature can bind a further legislature, but when you go down this road and you make this obligation, you have to ensure that it doesn't create any holes or any opportunities whereby that's where destabilization can happen when you make this move. And so it's got to be strong legislation to ensure that moving forward, it doesn't destabilize any issues with regard to what the debt service of the general fund is. And I think that's incumbent upon the legislature as well as, the executive branch having to pay the bills, every year putting together a budget. So that's where we're saying if we get off of this, meeting going forward and then have those presentations, that's where all those fiscal questions can be asked. And if there's assurances, then at least, we can be assured that there wouldn't be that destabilization, if you will.
Anybody from the retirement fund wish to speak? Mr. President?
Mr. Chair, can we get an idea of when we can expect comments from the governor's office?
So the idea was to once again, as the Vice Speaker had put out in the media and moving forward with the introduction of this bill, the idea was to go through this meeting, have this roundtable, and then take it from here, listening and getting all the input from the stakeholders that have been invited. And then that would be in the subsequent meeting would be when the fiscal team would address.
Senator, as far as
Yeah.
I think, as far as the board is concerned, we've taken a position, and this, we've discussed it, and I don't know what else. We're just waiting for a reaction from the legislature and the administration.
Right. And so the good senator has convened, and with all due respect, sir, if tomorrow this bill were passed and it were be transmitted, I mean, as I said before, we even saw in the last iteration of this same bill, the floor representation, the committee of the whole, the different perspectives that were put forward. The bill never made it out of committee. The bill never made it for the governor's consideration. So the idea is just to do what the vice speaker's asked to do, and that's to start fresh, start clean, take away from this meeting.
It's not advocating that we proceed without everybody knowing what's going on. It's just that we're waiting, and tell us.
If I may ask, Vice Speaker, so for the board, it just, again, we support this bill, and the issue is time, right? So we can answer the questions. I think that there are questions that now the administration is raising. I believe some of those questions we answered in our presentation at the public hearing last year, but again, we can present those. it goes back to time, right? So how much time will we wait before we take action on addressing a situation which we've been told the board has taken a long time to act on? But the truth is the board has taken action, and we presented a case that addresses a problem for 8,000 DC members. It provides a floor of benefits, and that's what we've been trying to solve. And we found a way to do it in a cost-neutral manner. So we believe that this is a plan that can work. We can answer the questions. I think that that's our responsibility. We can educate our members as to what that's going to cost them. But again, if we're going to start over, it's about time. So we started this process several years ago, and some of you are new, so for you it's a new process, right? So Senator Nicholas, for example, we just started to meet with him last November. But some of you, like the auditor and Rich and some of us board members, we've been working on this a long time. So it's all about time, and we still have 8,000 members who retire year after year, month after month. And our DC members are waiting for somebody to take action. So again, we are prepared to answer questions. We can go through scenarios, but it's just about time.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. The board has taken a long time, and finally it only reached that decision just last year when it presented the bill. I mean, and I can remember the numerous iterations that we talked about, in difference, and after listening to what has happened, it took the board several years, let me rephrase, to come up with a plan that was cost neutral. So on the other side of the equation, this side of the House needs to take time to digest and regurgitate and understand and inform the members as well as themselves, so that because if the board took 6 years to come up with this, we should not expect to pass this legislation in 6 months. It should be because it is a major piece of legislation. It affects the livelihood of our citizens when they retire. And so we want to make sure that this is the best possible plan. So it does take education, understanding, and presentation, and over again. And so, I guess the process here is for the board to present to the legislature again, what is this plan all about?
Thanks, Vice Speaker. Further to the auditor's point, I think things that need to really be hashed and they haven't been so far is we talk about, it's pretty clear, anyone you talk to in the bond world, that going back to a DB plan is going to have a negative effect. How much negative effect, we don't know. That's dangerous. We're talking about a plan that's going to be in effect 50 years, 100 years. What is the effect on our bond rating? Are we going to become another Puerto Rico? And we have no clue. It's just, the idea that we would move forward with this without having discussion with S&P or Moody's or Fitch is just, it's quite troubling. We've never once talked to them. And then the other piece of it that we've talked about is the Social Security piece of it. If we're going to use Social Security as a component of it, there's no open dialogue. Are we waiting for the Congresswoman's office? Where are we with that? I get the retirement funds, they put a lot of work into this. I disagree with the bill, but I know they put a lot of work into it with the right intention, and they're frustrated. But if we don't put those two pieces into play before we make this decision, I just don't see it as being responsible at all. This whole idea of cost neutral, really, are we never going to borrow again? Of course we're going to borrow again. And when we borrow again, what's the difference in the cost? We don't know. I don't know. I'm saying maybe it's 10 basis points. But from what I gather from talking to the people that I have, our senior underwriters, they seem troubled by it. So I think we need to have that discussion before we even talk about moving further down the road. I just think it's prudent. And I could be wrong, but at least we know we've had the discussion with the experts, find out where we're at with that. reach out to Social Security and find out. Maybe I'm wrong again with the timeline, but we were able to put it in place in less than a year in CNMI for all future hires, everyone going forward. I mean, we haven't bridged that either. So we've got these pieces that we've never even, we talk about in this room, but we haven't reached out to the experts to find out what are the options and how would it affect us. So, I mean, I just think it's making a decision in a room without reaching out and finding out what the options are. I think it's dangerous. I'll just leave it at that.
I will commit at this point to sending a letter to the administration asking them to contact bond counsel to provide an opinion on it. And then I'll disseminate that to everybody. I will hope that, I know that Senator Nicholas spoke to Congresswoman Bedalia when she was here last week about the Social Security component. I unfortunately didn't hear the answer, so I'll allow him to put that on the record if he wants at this point. But he is following up, and I haven't seen that the Congresswoman has reintroduced it in this Congress yet. I've been watching the bills that she's introduced, and I haven't seen the press release on this one yet.
From what we worked on in the NMI, there's two pieces to Social Security. One is going forward, and what's required there is a Section 218 agreement between the government and the Social Security Administration. It has nothing to do with Congress. The second piece of it is if we want to buy back benefits. That's what happened in 1972, I believe it was, when we were attempting to bring in the directors and the temporary hires. Congressman Wampat requested, I think it was Vice Speaker or Speaker Joe T, to approach Social Security and find out what the options were for Social Security. We were not turned down for future hires. I know there's that discussion out there. I've heard all kinds of things. I heard from one member of the community that we were going to be turned down from Social Security because they're afraid of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's had a Section 218 agreement for 30 or 40 years. All government employees of of Puerto Rico, with the exception of, I think it's firemen and I know it's the teachers, where the unions opted out of Social Security, are covered by Social Security. So it's not that we wouldn't be covered for future employees and then those that we agreed within the 218 agreement, which seats are covered. The question is if we're going to go and buy back benefits, which would be rather expensive and tedious and would take a long time, I believe, from what I understand from Congressman Sablan in the NMI. But that's where you have an act of Congress, and that's where you have to bring in Congresswoman's office. Because it's not Social Security in that case. It's I believe where it comes into, it's a liability of the government, and then Congress has to be involved. But going forward, it's a little bit more paperwork than if you and I set up a company tomorrow and went out and put our employees in it. That's a done deal. They're in it. When it comes to a government, because it's government to government under the Constitution, it requires an agreement between governments under Section 218 of the Social Security Code. But there's no ability that they would turn us down for future hires. The question is which seats are covered and how do you direct that? And that's where it would come down to a discussion. So I think Congresswoman Berdalia's office should be included in this, but it really is the government of Guam reaching out to the Social Security Administration and walking through it. I know that Congressman Sablan and Saipan was the lead point on it, but it's really government to government. It's not an act through Congress. That's my take. I mean, that's my understanding. I'm not an expert on it, but from what I've worked on in the NMI, that's what we saw.
I think there's a correction that needs to be made. CNMI, there's only two entities or two territories that are excluded from being allowed to negotiate a 218 agreement, and that's Guam and American Samoa. So it will require an act of Congress in order for Social Security Administration to negotiate with Gov Guam. Unlike the CNMI, who is not precluded from the statute, they were able to go in and do that. But in Guam and American Samoa's position, Congress has to actually go in and allow Social Security Administration to negotiate that with Guam and American Samoa.
Did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple updates. I have been working closely with the Congresswoman's office. I will be actually going to D.C. Later part of February, end of the month. I will be meeting with the Social Security Administration. I'll be meeting with the subcommittee in the U.S. Congress that oversees Social Security, and I'll be joining the Congresswoman in all those meetings so that we can get the final answers on all of these things, to include a potential timeline. I don't think that, given the realities of Social Security being available to every other U.S. jurisdiction except for Guam and American Samoa, it becomes a question of parity among U.S. jurisdictions. And so I think that because we're not asking to buy back years, we're just asking to go forward. And because it's all going to be basically whether or not the government of Guam is going to be willing to pay into that, then we're not asking the federal government to cough up any money for us to be able to be a part of this. It's all going to be whether or not Guam is going to want to participate. So I think what we need to do is go out there and communicate with the Social Security Administration, communicate with the subcommittee in Congress, and clarify Guam's current position, what Guam wants to achieve with Congress's help, and what we would like to work with the Social Security Administration in order to accomplish. For me, I'm just a little taken aback because I know that when we met last time, I talked about some concerns. But what's happened is the retirement funds basically come back and said, we just want to do Bill 2. And how long are we going to take to do that? I mean, that's kind of what you've communicated. How much more time are we going to spend?
Please don't
on this?
misunderstand me.
No, don't.
Please don't misunderstand
Okay.
me. I think...
I really do think there has to be a correction. I reintroduced Bill 2. They cannot introduce anything into this body. I reintroduced Bill 2 because I was advised by the retirement fund that this was the only bill that they felt that they could, fulfilling their fiduciary responsibilities to the DB plan and to the entire retirement fund, could support. And my emails and my mornings have been ruined by many comments to news stories about the hybrid, talking about me and what I'm doing and what I'm not doing as it relates to the retirement fund, hinting that there's going to be a lawsuit before, or expecting the retirement fund to file a lawsuit to enjoin the implementation of this law. So please, I want everybody to know that they provided me with a bill, and I'm using it as the staging point, not precluding any other thing, but I wanted to make sure that when we went into this new legislature with 3 new members sitting at this table, that we would have the bill that the retirement fund said they could support, and add on any other things that came along that they feel that their fiduciary responsibilities would be able to allow them to accept, because it would be to no one's interest to pass any bill and either have the governor veto it because of some reason, or worse, my worst fear is having the retirement fund join an unnamed person to enjoin the implementation of a law that we spent 8 months, a year trying to pass. So I'm trying to work with something that they say they can defend, and hopefully they can. And I don't want to pass anything that they're going to have to all of a sudden become party plaintiffs against the government of Guam. That would only make things even worse. So please, I just want, in defense of them, it was I that did it.
Okay, I'm just wanting to clarify the conversations at the table, because what I was interpreting was that the retirement fund board has made clear what they're willing to support, and that's pretty much that. But if
I think, again, Senator, you may be misunderstanding.
okay,
So we support the bill. There's
Okay.
no question about that. We're prepared to answer questions. We're prepared to look at options. All I was saying was that the board supports this bill, and any suggestion that we defer action on the bill is just going to take time. That's all I'm saying.
okay. So on the options that we talked about when we last met, has the board discussed those?
And the question that I'll put before you that the board has wondered is, are the answers to those questions, do those need to be answered before you'll consider this bill? Is this bill in a form that you can consider the merits of this bill and take action on it one way or the other? Or are you saying that we hold off action on this bill until we answer all your questions? I mean, and that's really where we're coming from, because the suggestion, the points that you presented at the last public hearing, or I'm sorry, roundtable, were a recommendation to form an alternative retirement plan with 4 different classes. So that's very different from the hybrid, right?
No, and again, that's where the misinterpretations continue.
Okay, so maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, what I was doing was I was clarifying pretty much what this bill is intending to accomplish, but I was putting in some additional points in there that I think we need to consider. Those 4 classes that I talked about are already in this bill. The existing employees, the new hires, the employees that we want to potentially put onto Social Security, and the employees who are going to be who converted from the old plan to the new plan that we wanted to be able to provide remedy for. So I basically, when we had our discussion last time, I categorized it very cleanly, but I wasn't saying that we're going to propose something entirely new. It was exactly what's being proposed here. The difference is the amounts. How much is going to be the government's contribution versus how much is going to be the employee's contribution. And another difference was eligibility. So for example, those who are going to make eligible for the hybrid plan, are they going to be everybody including all new hires, or are we going to limit it specifically to those who converted from the old plan to the new plan and those who are in the DC plan up until a certain point in time, a certain date? And then everybody else after that date who technically may have a balance that is sustainable, they are going to be rolled over into the Social Security plan when that becomes available. And until such time that becomes available, are we going to increase the contribution rate in the DC plan to match the Social Security portion until we're able to turn the Social Security option on? That's basically what we talked about. But in no way was I suggesting that we go back and rewrite the entire playbook. I was asking, can we evaluate the contribution amounts? Can we evaluate the eligibility requirements? Can we evaluate the effective dates on when all of these things become effective? But and that's why I kind of put those things forward, and I was hoping the board would have been able to evaluate those various scenarios so that we can have the discussion, because I'm very interested in making the presentation. What I would need help with, though, is for our actuary to be able to give us the scenarios as they would translate into real dollar terms. So for example, if we increase the contribution rate to, let's say, the government's contribution rate to, let's say, 7%, how much would that cost, and so forth and so on. So that instead of the employee, because right now in this current plan, as was mentioned by the governor's representative, former Senator Duenas, right now in this plan, we're going to be reducing the government's contribution for new hires. New hires to a period certain, because what happens is right now it's 5% from the government, 5% from the employee. We're going to be reducing it so that it's going to be increasing the employee's contribution rate by X amount, but we're going to be also reducing the government's contribution rate by X amount for new hires after a certain period of time. Am I correct if the actuary can answer? Because I remember in the presentations, the contribution rate for the government was going to stay even for existing employees, but it's going to go to pay for their unfunded liability portion. But for new hires, the government's contribution rate was only going to be 1.8% perpetuitously.
That's correct. The cost of the benefits, if you look for new employees, the total cost is 11.3%, of which employees would be paying 9.5% and the government share 1.8%.
That's right. So new employees would only be getting a 1.8% government contribution.
We need to clarify, because that's where the confusion is. Yes. Just so we're clear, that's not the contribution, that's the cost. That's the cost, which is separate from the contribution. And I think what happened last time is there was a lot of verbiage that was used, and we never calibrated the definitions. And so I think a lot of what we understood to be cost perhaps was communicated as contribution.
Okay, let me clarify what I mean by contribution. Whatever the government pays for the benefit of that employee.
That stays the same.
It stays the same for the hybrid plan for existing employees and new employees. No, but a portion, okay, so right now we have the government matching 5%, right? And now that amount is going to change to, the government is going to contribute 1.8. No, for the direct benefit of the employee, because the difference is going to go to the unfunded liability.
No, that's the cost.
That's the cost. That's what we're trying to distinguish, Senator, for you. So the government will continue to contribute 5% as the employer's share, but because we're spreading out the cost to the government for administering this plan drops to 1.8.
Right.
But the contribution is still 5%. The government will continue to contribute 5% to the hybrid plan members.
It's a
as their
DB
employer
plan.
Contribution.
I'm sorry.
No.
So it's not like a DC plan where the contribution goes directly into an employee's account. It's the cost of administering the entire program. And
Okay,
that cost is 1.8.
Let me explain to you why I still have this confusion. I'll just back up a bit.
Sure.
If we go with this hybrid plan, we're immediately going to increase the unfunded liability by $100 million. And we're going to fund that. And that funding is going to be a government contribution, a government cost, right? And once that funded amount is paid off, that government cost is going to go away. Yeah, and so that government cost is what would be taken out of the part that the government's paying for that employee. And when that goes away, the employee is going to be contributing the 9.8%, 10.5%, and the government's going to be contributing.
But what they get in replace of that, though, right, is a lifetime benefit that doesn't exist under a DC plan. So when the government contributes under a DC plan an amount certain, that limits their liability. They're done. Under the DB plan, they have a lifetime pension benefit. And so clearly that's going to be a little more costly, but it's spread over a larger number of people. So
when that $100 million is paid off,
when the unfunded liability is paid off.
Right.
Correct.
The amount that the government is paying is going to drop.
The total contribution rate will drop because we no longer have the unfunded liability. That's correct.
But the employee's contribution to the employee remains at 5%.
So if we can get... Yeah. No, it doesn't. And that's why if I could ask the actuary to speak to the
And
issue.
we're talking without charts and information, and this goes back to my comment. I think it's good to start all over to represent what the board's saying, to clarify the wording, because it has been a while. I remember taking the time to study this before I came in with testimony. It's been a while. My memory isn't that good. I need to be re-educated again. And this is where I think the roundtable comes in to talk about what does the Bill 2 offer? And then what are the potential deviations that we want to tinker with? When I say, and I don't, tinker is not the right, to enhance the benefit to, and so on. So this is where we need, a presentation from the retirement fund to, hey, this is what Bill 2 is offering. This is what the government's contribution is going to be. Because let me just go back to the funding of the unfunded liability. We're still at 30%. The next actuarial report will indicate where, with investment returns, whether or not that number will be as predicted, which might drop it down to slightly to 29%. There's been a projected schedule until we retire the unfunded liability in less than 20 years, 17 years. Okay, because that is the plan, that with the high contributions that we have right now, we are going to retire the unfunded liability in less than 20 years. So at that time, 17 years from now is when we're going to look at the government's contribution will be only 6.5%. What does that do for the proposed new plan for new DC members? So all of this needs to be redone and re-educated because we are starting a new administration, although it's the current administration, a new legislature, and to re-educate ourselves on the merits of the proposal.
And if I could just clarify, Mr. Speaker, where I'm trying to reconcile all of this. Right now, the government pays in 5%, and the employee pays 5%, and all of that goes to the employee's account. With this proposal, we're saying that the government is going to put in 1.8% in the employee's account. Let me finish. The employee is going to put in the difference, and it's going to come up to about 11 or 10 something percent. But the government is going to continue to contribute X percentages to pay down the unfunded liability that's going to manifest as a result of this conversion. Now, once that conversion is paid off, that government's portion going into that unfunded liability is going to be wiped out. And every employee is still going to be contributing 9%, and the government is only going to be contributing 1.8. Now, right now, the government contributes 5, and at a point certain in the future, the government's only going to be contributing 1.8. The difference is going to be used to pay off that unfunded liability, but once that's paid off, the benefit to the employee is going to drop from 5 to 1.8. And if the actuary can tell me I'm incorrect, then I'll accept that. But that's basically what I'm understanding at this point.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. The plan was designed to be cost neutral for the current DC members, going forward, then the cost of the benefit is being mostly paid for by the employee. And maybe that's something that can be looked at for future employees.
And so the point of my conversation and the reason why I'm being very clear about this is I don't support reducing the government benefit. I don't. I mean, the idea right now is shift it so that it goes to pay off the unfunded liability portion. But once that's paid off, then the employees from 2031 going forward are going to be only receiving a 1.8% government contribution versus every other employee who worked for the government before them who received a 5% government contribution. And so what I'm asking is for us to go back, look at the numbers, and figure out if we were to create a government benefit that would stay at 5% or maybe even a little bit higher from now through the life of paying down whatever unfunded liabilities, and to continue on after that's all been paid off, and to craft this existing bill in a manner that's going to address that. I mean, that would ameliorate a very big concern of mine, which is future government of Guam employees receiving a lower government contribution rate than current government of Guam employees. And I was speaking with some government employees, and they told me, they said, one of the things that is always factored into any employment opportunity is is the employee benefits that you receive. And one of those benefits is whether or not your employer provides a match. And a traditional match from employers these days is a 5% match, for example. And to say that our employer, Gov Guam, is going to be only matching government employee contributions by 1.8% at some point in the future, that's something that, is, I don't think, very attractive from an employee-employer relationship point of view. But that's just something that I wanted to put on the table. So if I could ask the retirement fund to take a look again at what I offered. I know that the director shared with me some numbers that probably needed to be tweaked in order for the calculations to work. But I'm very interested in exploring that. Now, I know that if we explore that, we're basically putting on the table the question of this not becoming cost neutral anymore. And basically, the government of Guam is going to have to pay extra in order to have either a level employee benefit throughout, or pay extra in order for us to put Social Security on the table, and maybe a combination of both. What I would like for us to consider evaluating is how much exactly are we talking about when we talk about that extra. And the reason why it's worth us exploring these opportunity costs is there's an opportunity cost if we don't, with respect to potential, bond ratings or whatever. So I don't like to hypothesize opportunity costs when I cannot project them, but one thing that we can project is what would the cost be for us to increase or maintain a level government benefit throughout the implementation of this plan, and where would that sweet spot be? At what point would we be able to maintain that level government benefit throughout at the lowest real dollar cost to the people of Guam? And I'm sure we can work with the actuary to come up with those calculations.
And I think if I heard Senator Dueñas's concerns from the governor's office, I think we're going to have to also provide for two other calculations. And it's going to have to be real numbers, not this 5% or 2% or 1.8. I think we're going to have to, for the employees that are out there, break it down. How much would it cost me if I'm making $30,000 a year? How much if I'm making 50? How much if I'm making 70? What would my contribution be? What would the government's contribution be? Because that's what they're concerned about. Whether or not they're going to make their mortgage or make a payment or whatever, it's going to be how much am I going to, it's going to be taken out of my paycheck every pay period. So we can address that. And I think the fiscal team that the governor's office is also concerned about is trying to figure out if we address any of these and we change any of the calculations, what is that going to cost? Is it going to be another 10 million, 15 million, whatever? I know you don't think I listen, but I heard
I know
what
you
you're
listen,
saying.
Vice Speaker, and you're spot on.
And so if we can address those concerns that the governor's representative has said, so the employees out there stop calling in and thinking that it's going to, and as I said, I'd like some of the ideas that Senator Nicholas has put up, because the equity issue has to be addressed at some point, and we have to be honest with the employees. I probably shouldn't say this, but, I'm hoping I'll be alive in 17 years, but good grief, I'd be old. But the thing is that we have to do something first before we think about whether or not in 17 years we're going to pay off this unfunded liability and everything's going to go back to zero. I mean, we have to do something to try to, so that there are people alive on this island in 17 years and aren't all on welfare because they don't have any retirement. So, but the cost to them, they just want to know what's the difference in my paycheck. For us, we can do the 5%, 1%, 8.5%, and but also the government needs to know how much is this going to cost them. What is it going to go from 28.5 or 31 or 32? And what does that number mean? 32% of what? And if it's 32% of a $600 million payroll, that's 200. So,
on that, Vice Speaker, Dave and I had coffee the other day, and we were just kind of trying to figure out how to simplify things. And one of the things we were talking about was, 30%, 28%, 29%, it's not really, taking it out of people's paycheck. And that's one of the problems people think, right? We had this huge unfunded liability. They had to find a way to pay it off, and we've been doing the right things. And they had to allocate it by agency, so we assigned it based on payroll. But one of the things I think would be helpful in trying to figure this whole thing out is just to take how much we're taking for the unfunded liability out of the equation. Put it in a dollar. How much is like a mortgage? How much are we having to pay down for this unfunded liability? And then how much are we really paying for the retirement fund going forward for the DB plan? So you said just take that dollar amount out and then work on percentages. And I think it would be something where we could all get our arms around it a little bit better and then figure out what the dollar amount is. Because all it is an allocation scheme, which it was one way to do it. There's 80 ways to do it. That's one way to do it, and it made sense. But it makes it so difficult because there's people out there thinking, 28% is going into Jerry's account and I'm only getting 5. That's not it, right? And so if we took the dollar amount out and then came back with the numbers so that we could really talk about it, it might be helpful. It's one of the things we were thinking of. And also, Mr. Camacho was right. I forgot why the Congresswoman is involved. There was 3 territories at one point that weren't considered states. I think it was D.C. as the third one, but the other one asked for it and got removed. So now it's down to 2. So yeah, I Vince, you're correct. I'm sorry about that. My head was off at the beginning of the year. Oh.
Any other comments? What I would like, and this is to the general public out there also, my email address is senator@senatorbjcruz.com. No, that's okay. I need all the frequently asked questions sent to me so that I can send it to the retirement fund and say, these are the 15 most asked questions. Can you address this in a short presentation with PowerPoint, with numbers of, with people making salaries of $24,000 and $45,000 and $70,000, and how much is this going to cost them, and so that they can say, hey, I want this, or, with some people it's like, there were those of us at the first administration never thought we'd make it past 30. and we're still here. And so, some people aren't planning because they're hoping they won't, or they think they won't make it to retirement, and Social Security is a few months away. So let's get those. And so, really seriously, I'm serious to the public. Any question that you want answered, email it to me, and I will forward it on to the retirement fund so that they can get some answers out there. If you and David can get together and try to figure out how we, whether or not the $200 million that we're setting aside for the government contribution, how much of that is actually being paid out in retirement annuities every year, and how much is paying down. I think a lot of people might be shocked. I don't know if you want that out there, but it's something that we all need to know. Yeah. So whatever makes it easier for other people to understand. Those of you with finance background, you can go through these percentages and make me dizzy. Go ahead.
I mean, I just, from an employee perspective, there's a couple of things I think that, number one, although an employer may traditionally match up to 5%, now it's probably a little bit lower. One thing they don't give you is they don't give you an annuity. They don't give you a guaranteed annuity. So when you educate the public and you say, hey, your cost is going to double, well, who wants to pay twice for something that they used to only pay half for? Well, you have to educate them on what they're getting, and give them examples of, okay, look at your account right now. If you have $30,000 in your account, this is what you can expect to get. So they understand that in actual dollars of what they actually have in their account, they will get $100 a month when they retire. Give them that half of the scenario, so they understand what they're measuring against when you say you're going to increase from 5% to 10.5%. But again, personally, I've told Vice Speaker, I've told you this before, is that, again, in my opinion, I think the portion relating to the 1% to the additional plan should be deleted, because the whole point is, once you provide that floor, once you provide that guaranteed annuity, if people wish to save more, fine. By all means, we can encourage them and make them do it, but there's no longer the necessity of, again, saying, okay, instead of, since you've done a terrible job on the 5%, we'll just lower it to 1% and hopefully you can do it. They're not going to do any better job with their 1% than they're doing with their 5%. So just remove it. I mean, you have is it the 398 that's available? What's available to the employees now? 457. I mean, if that's always available, that's fine. Anybody who wants to voluntarily save more money, let them do that. I think Senator Mike has talked about, and I think the lower cost, it's actually not cost neutral. My recollection is that if the government converts to the hybrid plan, it actually saves money, right? Because they go down from $29.85 to $29.30. And so we talked about, that's where we thought the missing 5%, to 1.8% is. And if the government just pays the same amount of money that it's paying right now, one of two things can happen. You can either look at adjusting the cost to the employee, or I think what really should be looked at is increasing the benefits to the employee. Because I think Chris Budasi, had talked about how, you would have to work 40 years to get 60% or something like that. 40 years at 1.5, and again, take a look at something like that. And so I would ask that be, if possible, be taken a look at. If the government even goes as far as what the senator proposed, if the government matches 9%, okay, my goodness, then the benefit would be really something fabulous. But if the government at least got, but there's no reason the government shouldn't be able to match the 5%, because that would truly be cost neutral, because it would just maintain it at the 29.85%. And in fact, if the government maintained the same amount it is right now and adopted the plan as it is, it would actually decrease the term of the unfunded liability, because you'd actually be putting more into the unfunded liability. But if we're comfortable with the unfunded liability being paid off and adjusted as it is in the 17 years, then if you keep the government at the same amount it's paying now, then you'll be able to increase the benefits, and you'll be able to get something that's closer. Again, it's not going to be anywhere near what the DB is to the old plan, but you get something a little more comfortable and closer to, I think, what the employees deserve. Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, I want to thank the Retirement Fund for coming, and thank you for flying all the way in for a 1-hour meeting. I feel bad now. Oh, okay.
There's no reason you can't start the calculations.
Oh, it's not this, okay. And I want to thank my colleagues for joining me this afternoon. Again, if any of you have any questions that any of your constituents send to you, send it to me and I'll send it to them to have it answered so that you feel comfortable. Because I know that everybody's getting questions out there. I'm not the only one that's being asked. So if any of you have questions that are being posed to you, forward it to me and I'll forward it to the Retirement Fund. Let's see if we can get the answer so that everybody can feel comfortable, and I will send a letter to the governor asking to get the bond counsel to address the issue so that we know what the implications of this might be, and we'll follow up with letters to the Congresswoman and maybe even the governor to find out whether or not there's a way, in his trip to Washington, D.C. next month to talk to whoever needs to be talked to about amending the law and getting the agreement signed. Okay? Okay. Again, thank you all, and I think we are moving. At least we now have a better idea of how we're going to try to get everybody. Here, chicken.